Well, would you look at that? A perfect VFR day at the Oyunke National Forest. It is the perfect picture to put into play today's presentation. Additional VFR traffic. We're learning about additional VFR consideration today in the San Juan Center en route environment. Steve here, happy to have you aboard. Thank you for spending some time with me as we touch up again some VFR items that we didn't cover in our first VFR Our People 2 presentation. This is a nice little supplement. It won't be nearly as long, at least I hope not, I promise. I could relatively promise you that. We're going to cover some great fundamentals today and some considerations exactly as the subtitle suggests. So without further ado, let's get to a bulleted list. Let's take inventory of what we're going to cover today. I'm excited because anytime you work VFRs, it means it's beautiful outside, and the Caribbean is a beautiful place to control air traffic. So let's dive right in. I'll see you at the next slide. Calling San Juan, say again, right? That's a phrase you're going to be saying a lot with respect to VFR aircraft, because sometimes you'll be tied up with a sequence over Vetus, or maybe an aircraft getting radar identified over Princess Juliana, and sure enough you hear this mutter on the frequency, a fast call sign, possibly an aircraft type, maybe VFR thrown in there, and your brain does a whirlwind and you're like, oh man, I gotta get back to you. And that's the way you usually do it. So no big deal. It happens. It happens to the best of us. Sometimes we are caught off guard because we're not expecting it. So no shame in that. So the bulleted list, let's get to it. We're going to be exploring detail items in the local VFR micro-ER's flight plan input. So that sounds really complicated, but if you remember from our first video, we went over the keystrokes and the message entry into micro-ERs to produce a strip and a beacon code for your VFR flight plan, your local VFR flight plan. We covered the function message, the aircraft type, and then in any order, the fixed pairings, the VFR fixed pairings that we are made aware of, and the aircraft type, and some additional optional info like the altitude and equipment suffix, which is very interesting. So we're going to touch on that again and show you some funny real-world examples. We're also talking assigning headings and or suggesting headings for VFR aircraft. Now, we did talk about this in multiple videos, right, across our small volume series of vectoring in chapter 5. We did a lot of that under radar identification, our Barinkin video about sequencing, and we also did it about our first VFR video. But we're going to touch back on vectoring and just remind you of some things and describe a local situation that occurs a lot, possibly every day that it's nice out in VFR. You'll experience this. So without further ado, ready, set, jets, go. I will see you at the sector. So here we are in the northwest corner of Sector 8. As you remember, our last VFR video, or the first VFR video in this series, was dedicated to one of our users in particular, Tradewind Aviation, Goodspeed, and their PC-12s that they fly VFR in this VFR corridor from St. Barth over the U.S. Virgin Islands to San Juan. And they serve that flight a lot, and during the high season, there's a lot of volume, multiple flights a day, and they all depart in banks, so there's multiple aircraft coming both in and out. So I figured, why not dedicate a video to another busy VFR corridor, which is the one we've talked about, right, in great detail between Punta Cana and San Juan, or the island of San Hispaniola and Santo Domingo and San Juan, with the small airports in between Ponce, Mayaguez, and Barinkin. So here we are doing just that. So we are sitting here and we hear San Juan Center, test 1, 2, 3, twin Cessna departed Mayaguez, VFR advisories to Caracas. Now we have explored enough videos talking about the radar environment here in San Juan that we know, seeing that code, a 1200 code with an altitude and a speed associated with it, we have learned enough about the tracks and how targets perform and appear to you on micro-ERs that that is a VFR aircraft, and we should be prepared to possibly hear from that aircraft for services. So they did. They called us. San Juan Center, test 1, 2, 3, twin Cessna departed Mayaguez, VFR advisories to Caracas. That's a pretty good check-in. So Caracas, if you're not familiar with the area that we're talking, is in Venezuela. It's the capital of Venezuela. San Juan Center shares a common boundary with Maiquetía Center, which is the control center that overlooks the the nation of Venezuela. So this aircraft's going southeastbound. So we start our basic flight plan. Keystroke VF, right? No mystery about that. Test 1, 2, 3, preceded by a Z. MIGUEZ to MI0, right? Going to Maiquetía, and the fix MyLock is kind of like one of those fixes that we are able to use as an identifier to input into microERs, right? Sounds good so far. Cessna 402, enter, beep beep goes the barcode printer, that hissy whine, and boom, we are met with a beautiful strip, right? More than a second, the tablets would populate with the beacon code for test 1, 2, 3, and it would be fantastic, right? Well, let's take a look at the details. I'm going to see you at the next slide, and we're going to talk about things and dive into this flight plan a little bit deeper. It doesn't look like there's much to dive into, but boy, are we going to find out. We just opened up a can of worms. So let's see each other at the next slide. So let's pretend between the time we went from the last slide to this slide, you gave the code, and test 1, 2, 3 has been radar identified. You got a mode C validation. Everything is perfect. Everything seems fine. Look at that. Test 1, 2, 3. VFR is in the assigned portion of the data block, leaving 2,300, speeding up to about 100 knots, and is a twin Cessna, as we expected. But remember, like I said, hold that thought before we go celebrating and thinking that our job is done, other than giving service to this particular aircraft, because some weird things are going to start happening. And if we don't address them and reconcile them, we're going to open up that can of worms. So first thing in this line, this Swiss cheese model that we also talk about, and if the A side is possibly D side certified or has been working A side for a period of time, they will notice what is wrong first. And that's what I said exactly. The A side is like, I ain't never seen this before, because look, there's your flight plan. Now, as you know, we usually discard these strips. You mark up the proposal, and the proposal gets filed for traffic count. But the A side could have easily seen this and noticed something's wrong. Because look at this, test 1, 2, 3. That's our airplane. Look, 7420 and the squawk code, twin Cessna. That's what we did. But look at the fixes that we're getting. Look at the fixes that flight data processing is showing you on this ticket. Look at that, a conch fixed radial distance, a conch fixed radial distance in the fixed posting, if this ticket were to be posted actually in the live traffic bay, and then a Haggett fixed radial distance. Something's up here, because we know that conch is in sector 6 and Haggett is in Miami Center's airspace. It's in sector 62's airspace. This aircraft's going to South America. Now, it doesn't take a geographical genius to determine that this flight plan, as being viewed by flight data processing of the NAS, the NAS thinks they're going somewhere, well, somewhere. Do you know where it's going? I have a clue, and maybe if you paid attention to the Academy when they use sample airspace, you'd have an idea, because look at this. What sorcery is this? Like, that's what you're thinking, like, well, why is this weird, right? Or why does this look the way it does? Well, there they are. That's throwing me off. And where is MIO? It's in our airspace, right? Well, of course it is. You have a list of identifiers that you're allowed to use. But guess what? That's an O, not a 0. The identifier for MyLock when using it as a fixed pairing is MI0, not MIO. Because guess what? Guess where MIO is? Oh man, it's in Kansas City Center's airspace. It's Miami Regional Airport. And I'm not talking Tamiami Airport. This is in Kansas City airspace, Kansas City Center's airspace. Very, very far away. And guess what? If we don't take any kind of action to correct this, and that aircraft gets terminated, goes onward to Caracas, we terminate services, right? Give wonderful, excellent advisories and information and termination at or near the boundary with Maiquetía Center. This flight plan is going to continue to be processed by every serving center and every serving facility downline until it would theoretically reach Miami Regional Airport. So we got to be very, very careful, because this could prompt a ONOT, search and rescue procedures, right? Overdue aircraft VFR overdue aircraft. So we don't want to get into any of that. So we have to pay attention to our keystrokes. We got to pay attention to our fat fingers because O and 0 are real close to each other, and also too sometimes that slash or no slash really throws us off. So you just have to be careful. This is simple. So if you remember, the easy fix would be is now that this aircraft is inside the NAS, right? It has a CID associated with it. A simple fix is to either remove the ticket, right? You could remove strips on it. This is a VFR aircraft. We don't need estimates. It's not going to serve a purpose for control purposes or coordination purposes. So it's not like we need to coordinate this aircraft with Mike Attia that we need to strip for. Just remove strips on it. It's very simple. The aircraft will continue to be tracked by micro EARTs unless you drop the track, of course, but even then, you're fine. And if you really wanted to get fancy, you can put a change of destination in it. It would probably take it and then have a remove strips message go into all downline sectors so nobody ends up calling you or calling the facility looking for this aircraft. So just be very, very careful. I thought this warranted an own video or at least a mention to say, hey, these are some pitfalls that occur when you enter VFR flight plans, albeit a little too quickly. So a solution and a technique. Now, mind you, this is just a technique. Learn as many of our identifiers, our fixed pairings as you can that are acceptable for local VFR flight plan input. If they're going to Mike Attia, maybe remember one fix. If they're going to PRCO, maybe remember 3 fixes that serve general geographical areas. I'll give you an example. I like to think whenever anybody comes from the east, they're sticking close to the island chain because they're VFR. Usually VFR aircraft do that. I use GABAR, Golf Alpha Zero. That's my go-to. My go-to when talking aircraft over Punta Cana, Santo Domingo, AXO. It just sticks out. And then Mike Attia, well, I do use MI0. So, but we don't get too many VFR aircraft. So this is an extreme example, but an illustrative example nonetheless as to what can happen. Anytime you do not use the prescribed fixed pairings that are locally adapted for us, and that 3-letter identifier that you use is a NAVAID or an airport associated with a K code, of course, somewhere in the States, somewhere in the continental United States, guess what? The NAS is thinking that's where that aircraft is going, and if you take no action, that aircraft will literally be flight plan processed all the way to destination. So it's funny, if you were to let this flight plan continue, theoretically it could possibly, albeit very unlikely given that it's a twin Cessna, would make its way through all the associated centers until reaching Kansas City Center and then the approach control facility serving Miami Regional Airport. So yet again, a word of caution, but it's a really interesting thing. So it's actually kind of fun, the idea of twin Cessna going from Mayaguez all the way to Miami Regional Airport, not the one in Florida. So yet again, just be careful, follow up on details. When something looks wrong, say something, and know where you are sending these aircraft, right? That's what we tell people when they're training on the D sides, and the R sides. So good job with that. I'm happy you went over it. Let's go see what things should look like the right way. So let's pretend that we are hitting reverse, like the cha-cha slide, and see how this will go smoothly and accurately. Okay, I'll see you at the next slide. So we hopped in the DeLorean, went 88 miles per hour, and returned 7 minutes into the past so we can avoid making that folly, right? So we can make Doc Brown proud of us. So here we are. San Juan Center, test 1, 2, 3, twin Cessna, departed Mayaguez, VFR advisories to Caracas. It's like deja vu. And here we go, VF, very good. Test 1, 2, 3, looking fantastic. Mayaguez to MI0. Nicely done. Cessna 402, enter. Beep, beep, or one goes the barcode printer, and you are met with that. Now, as you see, it looks starkly similar to the flight plan that had MIO, right? That little thin slash of the 0 differentiates it from O, Oscar, and boy, the succeeding actions that will happen upon auto acquisition are night and day different. So let's go to the next slide and see exactly how that plays out upon auto acquisition of the track. Okay, bueno. Look at that. Test 1, 2, 3, VFR 2,300 knots. Cessna 402. Deja vu, like I said, everything is looking so similar, right? The subtle differences cannot be overstated. I know it may seem that I'm beating this to a dead horse, but boy, is it relevant just to save you any kind of grief and to make you look good in your training session. That's why we're here, right? To make you look good, to do a good job, and we want you to do a good job. So sure enough, look at that. If we were to go through the succeeding strips that get printed out as the aircraft auto-acquired and got flight plan processed, we would see something very, very familiar, like an old friend waving at us like, hey, this is kind of what you need, even though I'm VFR. And we'd go to that friend and give him a hug and say, you know, I'm happy to see you. Look at that. We got a MyLock ticket. We got an enter ticket and the fixed posting, right? So we were to need this for any kind of reason be posted in the live traffic day with all the IFR traffic. You see how it would fit. It fits the mold of something that we are about to do, that we would normally do, that what we would expect. Or put it more bluntly, what flight plan processing is doing to the aircraft is exactly what we are expecting it to do and what the pilot wants to do. We are all in harmony. The machine of the aircraft in harmony with the pilot, whose intentions are in harmony with our expectations, and our actions in harmony with our machine, aka micro ERs. We are all firing on all cylinders, and we're all giving each other giant high fives, or like a weird, like, you know, dance around a cauldron or whatever. So it's fantastic. It looks great. And the next thing we would realize is the A side would be like, ah, hey, this looks a lot better, because they would see it and say, this actually makes sense. I'm the A8 or D8, and I'm like, hey, yeah, this is following a pattern that I'm familiar with. So good job with that. So yet again, just to kind of put a summation on this point, a final realization, just be very, very careful. Slow yourself down, especially when you're training when working VFRs, because you don't want to be that person to leave the sector, work another session, and to have perhaps a Miami watch supervisor or an FLM in the ocean area of Miami Center call and say, hey, I'm looking for this aircraft, VFR, very, very, you know, coming through our airspace, estimating about an hour ago. You don't want to get that call, because chances are, if you can't forget, if sometimes you might forget you even worked this airplane. You might have had a really busy session and you forgot that you worked this particular aircraft, and you paid no mind to it because you thought you followed through correctly. And you did for the most part, other than a slight error. But we know how the Swiss cheese model that we talk about, and how errors can exponentially become detrimental to the operation, and we don't want that happening. Which brings up a further point, that it's a good practice, if this aircraft were truly going to somewhere in the continental United States, truly going to an airport that lies within, well, outside of San Juan Center, Miami Center, you would either, one, as an R6 controller, terminate at the Miami San Juan boundary and have them call Miami and have ERAM put in a VFR flight plan. A VFR flight plan that does not have to have a Z in front of it, because that is a San Juan local thing. Remember, this is a local VFR procedure. So recall that you don't really want to hand this aircraft off as is, with that flight plan as seen in the strip, right, with a weird identifier as the destination with a Z in front of it. That's a local procedure. Terminate the boundary, or if you want to go the extra mile, fix up the call sign. Take the Z out, put an actual destination in, like do a 6, 7, 10 amendment, and make that flight plan nice and pretty and presentable, and it will be handed off and participate in NAS and cause no further hiccup as it makes its way from facility to facility. So if you are going to do that, just clean it up a little bit. If not, terminate and have them contact Miami, and Miami will get them radar identified again, get them on a beacon code to their liking, and a flight plan to their specifications. So wonderful job with that. Let's move on to our next subject matter. We're almost done with this video. You guys are doing fantastic. So keeping with the theme of pesky annoyances in the VFR environment, specifically this northwest corner of Sector 8, I figured this would be a great time to address the parachute jumping area over the Arecibo Airport. Right, you might be thinking to yourself, and I know I thought this, especially as a developmental, it was almost like a grudge I could not get over. Who puts a airport allowing parachute jumping activity south of a major IFR departure and inbound corridor, Route 2, right? Barinkin departures, joining the en route structure that way, and turboprops and jets by coordination are allowed to go eastbound at Route 2, and a major VFR corridor for all kind of different aircraft. And they put a parachute jumping activity area. So maturing a little bit as a controller and just maturing, I guess, as an individual and having more of a tolerance for patience, I suppose, or something like that. I figured, you know what, it's probably very scenic. It's right over the water. It's at an airport. We are conducting air traffic on an island that is only 100 miles long by 35 miles wide. I guess we can be a little forgiving that, hey, that's probably the most advantageous spot to have it because there's not too many airports on this little island. And so I guess I kind of eased up because, well, reasons, I guess. But here we are. So we have a departure who we usually work as an IFR aircraft, but sometimes they will go VFRs. Amflight 6911, Beechcraft 1900, VFR 5500, and they are eastbound. And sure enough, the local procedure when it comes to VFR operations and parachute jumping activity over Arecibo is that approach will point that aircraft out to us. So they are talking to R1 and R5 and doing their thing, right, with their jumpers. Everything is absolutely wonderful. Now, granted, this is not to scale, so I apologize in advance if the Arecibo area is not where it should be or as accurate as it is, but just put that suspension of disbelief that you afford me so much and is greatly appreciated on my behalf. So number 135 Delta Delta, 1500, they're climbing to that altitude. That's probably where they're going to release their jumpers. They're going at ground speed and they're a King Air, which is fine. So we're not going to go over the local procedure because you'll learn that, and we'll go into that in advance about the scratch pad stuff. But let's talk what you are allowed to do with VFR aircraft, right? So we're going to pull back some of the things that we learned in our last presentation, bring up some rules in the 7110, and let's talk about this, right? Because we have to do something. There is some kind of control action we have to take. We do not want Amflight 6911 maintaining their own navigation to San Juan, overflying the Arecibo Airport at 5,500. This one giant propeller, right, turboprop, just swinging as we have people falling out of airplanes with parachutes. That is not a very pretty picture. Even if we are getting to the little more fantastical, worst case scenario, but we don't want any of that to happen. And that's why we're here. We're controllers. This is what we're doing. So let's go over some rules again, right? Let's refresh ourselves on some rules because this will be very helpful because you will be doing this a lot. I promise you, you will be doing this a lot, avoiding the jumpers over Arecibo with your aircraft transitioning to the San Juan terminal area. So parachute operations, 974. So we're in chapter 9 now, special flights, right? Other controlled airspace, which it addresses airspace specifically, Alpha, Class A airspace, B airspace, C airspace, even D airspace. And here we are with other, right? Which is Class E airspace for this area that we are working in, right? So here are some of the highlights of that. Issue advisories to all known aircraft which will transit the airspace within which the jump operations will be conducted. Advisories must consist of location, time, duration, and altitude from which the jump will be made. Nice. So there's some criteria there that we have to advise aircraft of when conducting parachute jumping activity. So this is on us. We are not talking to November 5 Delta Delta. We are talking to Amflight 6911. So this is something we have to prepare ourselves to tell Amflight 6911 about these jumpers over Arecibo, this King Air with people and parachutes. Wonderful. So we move on to the next section or the paragraph. When time or numbers of aircraft make individual transmissions impractical, which sometimes this will happen, advisories to non-participating aircraft may be broadcast on appropriate control frequencies, nice, or when available, the ATIS broadcast. So we don't have an ATIS at our disposal. We are not talking from a terminal aspect. We're not talking from a tower aspect. We are talking about we can use our frequency. When you queue up the mic, you're going to use that frequency. It's a wonderful tool to transmit message en masse, right? We only have one aircraft in this example, but more often than not, when you find yourself working in the real world, in this situation, you might have 2 or 3 more aircraft on frequency, and it's great to get them all out of the way. D, when requested by the pilot, nice, look what they're setting up for us. And to the extent possible, assist non-participating aircraft to avoid the airspace within which the jump will be conducted. Perfect. So D is a interesting paragraph because it is saying, hey, you know what? It's in everybody's interest. You as the controller, obviously them as the transitioning non-participating aircraft, and the participating aircraft, that we all don't want these two guys getting too close to each other, especially when parachutists are involved. So we're going to use a vector. So to refresh, we're going to go back to chapter 5, right? 9 to 5, right? 8 hours of work. And remember our vectoring application, one of the initial parts of that chapter when it comes to radar. Operating VFR at those locations where a special program is established or when a pilot requests or you suggest and the pilot concurs. Awesome. We are going to suggest headings, and you're going to see or suggest changing courses to avoid the Arecibo area like the plague, right? To stay away from there. There's like King Air orbiting, owning a whole bunch of altitude from the runway all the way up to 11,500 feet, doing weird circles, going off course, going outside that circle, causing you a whole bunch of grief. The COCCA's going off, the conflict alert. Let's just keep this AMP Flight 6911 away from it. It's in everybody's best interest, for your peace of mind and for the safety of everybody. And that's what we are trying to do, safely do this. So let's go to the next slide and let's take care of it with all of these rules, these empowering regulations in mind, and let's put it into action. Okay, I'll see you there. So we freeze framed it in time, and we are ready to transmit some control instructions and some advisories to AMP Flight 6911, our lone aircraft on frequency, because bear in mind that 5 Delta Delta is on 119.4. They are talking to our friends on the other side of the owl at approach. So here we go. So here's what I want you to consider. There may or may not be official guidance from San Juan, like locally phraseology, right? But knowing the requirements that we read in chapter 9, we can assemble something that resembles a good advisory that will get the job done and adhere to all the requirements as per chapter 9. So attention all aircraft, use caution, parachute jumping activity in the vicinity of Arecibo Airport, active 11,500 for the next 10 minutes. That took care of everything, right? You duration, 10 minutes, the altitude, position. But we're not going to stop there, right? We read all of that section of chapter 9, and we're going to keep it going. So here we go. We're going to combine transmissions because why not? This is perfectly safe, perfectly acceptable. AMP Flight 6911, traffic 12 o'clock, 12 miles, orbiting Arecibo, King Air, 7,500, climbing with jumpers. Suggest to maintain VFR south of the observatory or north of the shoreline to avoid. Perfect. And this is where it helps to know some geography of this beautiful island, this enchanted island, this wonderful place to control air traffic, as I alluded to in the title slide, because it is beautiful and you have really cool visual landmarks to make reference to help pilots out. Because look, this is a snapshot of the TAC for Puerto Rico, the terminal area chart. And how perfect it is, because pilots, if they're flying VFR, they have some sort of chart on board, current charts. So, and look at the advice you just gave, right? We suggested it. You can go ahead and assign it if you want. Yet again, this is a technique. Do what your training team tells you to do. But suggest is a good word. It's in their best interest. It also saves you from giving a whole bunch of traffic advisories, not to mention possible, conflict alarms going off and traffic alerts, which you really don't want to. But look at the way the arrows go. If they stay north of the shoreline, they stay well north of the airport, but will require a point out to sector 6, which is fine. You know how to do point outs. I have faith in you that you would be able to excel at this, no doubt. And some aircraft will choose to maintain north of the shoreline over the water and just stay out of that situation altogether. Also, too, if you look at the VFR chart, we have the radio telescope, the Arecibo Observatory, right? 007, GoldenEye, the Cradle, right? If you played Bond on N64, which I also love. Sean Bean, Pierce Brosnan, dangling off the end of it. Really cool. So it's pretty cool because some aircraft, if they don't fly through here very often, they might want to see the Arecibo telescope. And guess what? Tell them maintain south of the observatory. Very nicely done there. You see how those arrows keep them well laterally clear of the jump zone, which is the airport, and they can proceed resuming on navigation to San Juan. You can assign a heading, right, just in the event of an IFR aircraft came about who was requesting to be on Route 2. You would have to vector, right, making sure they're vectored above the MVA and following up with all of that. But you see how you're able to suggest or assign a heading to a VFR aircraft, always saying to maintain VFR that you are not giving any kind of IFR clearance, that they need to be at a certain altitude, and a heading to maintain, right? You are still keeping it very, very much so lax and on the pilot to be performing seeing a void and their own navigation, whichever means they're using, whether the chart, dead reckoning, seeing a void, all that wonderful things that VFR pilots do. So fantastic job with that. A very simple and easy presentation today. Not really high end or anything really sexy or open ended like we've been doing, but a point nonetheless that you will see this situation. And I figured it was definitely worth mentioning and warranted us to touch on these two subject matters as you make your way through your training, because VFRs will make up a lot of your users. So why not learn a little more? So fantastic job with that. Really proud of you. Thanks for sticking with me. Let's go to the closing side and we'll say our adieus. Just remember, crabs need advisories too, man. If he's looking for the beach, just pick him up and put him back on the beach. He'll be a lot happier that way. So this little guy, you need a little help to the beach, just pushed him off in the right direction. He was very, very happy about that. So wonderful job yet again, guys. The video, I hope it served its purpose. I hope it touched on points that if you do not, or if you did not know that they existed, now you know that they do, and be ready for those things. Remember, we are trying to emphasize some fundamentals here, and it's very important to take your time to be thorough and to examine your work. So that kind of takes care of what we were talking about with the VFR, local VFR procedures, knowing what to do whenever they are leaving our airspace to another NASA facility, and what to do whenever we type in some unknown identifier that we make up on the fly, thinking it's right, and it's going to be somewhere in the continental United States, up in the NAS that way. Also, too, obviously dealing with the parachute jumpers to paint the picture for your aircraft, right? Paint the picture, paint that masterpiece, and just let them know where these jumpers are. Half the time, or actually more than half the time, they're going to be familiar with the Arecibo Airport, and you're going to be able to have them comply and fly safely, VFR, seeing and avoiding, and making your life easier. Save you the, point out to R6. But that's fine. You could probably use the practice. I know I sure could anyways, too. So, guys, wonderful job. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. I know I did. I always enjoy hanging out with you guys. Talking shop is the highlight of the day, the evening, the morning. So have a fantastic day. May your attitude be just like your separation, positive. Steve here wishing you nothing but clear skies, and I will see you